Welcome. I'm here with David Williams, the speaker for our upcoming Hydraulics 101 session. David, tell us what you will be covering in this two-part webinar.
Well, hydraulics is a very extensive subject area, and colleges offer a whole series of regular courses on this topic. But what we'll do in this webinar is to talk about what is hydraulics, to define what is hydraulics and kind of differentiate it from that of hydrology. So also we'll look at what do we look for in hydraulics when we're out there in the field, some of the characteristics of flow, and you've heard of probably some of these characteristics such as subcritical, supercritical, backwater. And we'll talk about those terms. What are some of the more simple hydraulic calculations methods, and a little bit of channels and floodplains definitions, because we're going to be talking about what we call open channel hydraulics. And so we'll talk about the features of a channel and its overbanks and how they're determined and how important it is for determining hydraulics. Talk a little bit about flow terms such as steady, unsteady flow, what they all mean, such as hydraulic jumps. Those are all important terms in our study of hydraulics, and it's important to understand what they mean. Then we'll talk about the granddaddy equation of hydraulics, which is the Manny's equation, and we'll talk about the features of the Manny's equation and how we use it to do our hydraulic studies. Then from there, we'll talk about the application of the information we'll get from the Manny's equation and how it affects shear stress, because shear stress and the application of the shear stress is very important for erosion control professionals, because the shear stress determines what can or cannot be on a bank to prevent it from eroding out. And then we'll talk a little bit about channel features, such as meanders and straight channel, braided channels. We'll talk a little bit about the differences between those. Also then in part two, we'll talk about the shear stresses that we determined from the earlier part one and how it applies to bends, because shear stress on a bend is a little bit different than a shear stress going in a straight line. And we'll talk a little bit about bridge hydraulics, because bridges are very important aspects of crossings of rivers, and so we need to understand the hydraulics related to bridges and how scour is determined for each of these bridge locations. Talk a little bit then about culverts, how they're designed, some of the nomenclatures of culverts, weirs, talk a little bit about channel stabilization and how we go about determining stable channels, and then lastly we'll talk about how we can adjust the slope of a channel that may be too steep.
Your sessions are always jam-packed with lots of great information. What real-world applications will you be going over?
Well, we'll go through several examples related to hydraulics. For instance, we'll talk a little bit about application of the hydraulics, and then how we use the hydraulics to come up with shear stress, and then how the shear stress is used to design an erosion control mat that has to be in the river. So we'll go over one of those. We'll also then go over what kind of adjustments have to be made as we go around the bend, because as we go around the bend, there's added shear stress to the outside, so how do we have to account for that and maybe make adjustments to the material that we have on that outside bend. And also talk a little bit about how do we space grade control structures, determined by a slope, an equilibrium slope, and the slope that's required. Or we'll talk a little bit about the application of grade control structures based upon an equilibrium slope and the actual slope that's out there, and then how do we space them and how high do we make them. So we'll go over examples such as that.
Knowing how to make adjustments based on your site is good to know. Tell us, what are the biggest misperceptions of hydraulics?
It may not necessarily be a misconception, but it's a understanding of the terminology in hydraulics. And people hear a lot of these terms and don't fully understand them, and sometimes are too shy to ask for them. And it may be important in their work. Hydraulic engineers loosely talk about things such as hydraulic jump, backwater effects, headwater, tailwater, a whole bunch of terms, steady, unsteady flow, a whole bunch of terms that the hydraulic engineer may know intimately, but the peripheral people that are working with these don't exactly know. And so it's not a misconception. It's more rather of a lack of understanding, and sometimes the hydraulic engineer is not patient enough to fully express what these terms are to the peripheral professionals, such as erosion control professionals or wetlands professionals. So they just don't take the time to fully express that, and I think that maybe cause a misperception of hydraulic engineers in terms of they just can't fully express what the terms are. And a lot of these terms that I just mentioned, we will be discussing them in the Hydraulics 101.
It's true that many hydraulic terms aren't widely understood. Who can benefit from taking this course?
This is applicable for anybody that's involved in water resources engineering in an open river environment, because regardless of your discipline, whether you're a resource agency personnel, maybe a biologist, a fisheries biologist, maybe a wetlands specialist, erosion control specialist, even a regular engineer that's brushing up on the hydraulic aspects of a river. And so these presentations that we're going to talk about, these two-part presentation, would be very helpful for those people that are, again, in the water resources industry. So I urge you to come in and sit in on these two parts. And hopefully, before you got into this part, you've also taken Hydrology 101.
If you're involved with water resources engineering at all, this course is for you. If you want to learn more from David, check out his Hydraulics 101 course at forestryuniversity.net and sign up for his full series at a 20% discount.